Yeah, I was really looking forward to today because it's really a challenging subject. I mean, even when we come from a really technical side of privacy, and I try not to mention too much about the Dutch child benefit scandal. Of course, it's mentioned everywhere. But me coming from the Netherlands, and after the mention from Olczek in the opening speech, I would tell that I mean, at that time in 2020, I was hired to finalize kind of a data privacy impact assessment for that specific risk classification model that was used during that scandal. And human oversight is one of the things that I saw that goes so wrong. And we usually talk about what can go wrong with an AI system, but in this case, so many things went wrong surrounding the whole process of fraud detection in this case. Well, it's all public. I mean, I'm sure you have heard it 1,000 times. Just wanted to make that connection because that is what triggered to me also the comment from IPEN today and other comments that have been done. And the fact that, yeah, in the end, you are affected. And when is automation starting? And that's something that we saw in the Toeslag affair and the Dutch benefit scandal. I mean, the system at that time was not recognized as an automated decision-making system. And still, look at all the impact that it had. So from my perspective, just my 2 cents before I jump into the panel. When does it really start? It's the moment that we have the user interaction. And more, usually what I promote is more looking at human oversight from the whole life cycle of our system. I call it AI, I call it something different. And look, based on a risk-based approach, at what point we need to implement some kind of human oversight. Still, opening the floor for the amount of challenges that even that involves. Now I want to present, because today is not about me, but about these two distinguished speakers that I have besides me, Sarah Sterz and Leila Methnani. I will read your background because that's not something I could memorize. Sarah, PhD student with Professor Holger Hersbons at Saarland University. She has a background in both philosophy and computer science. She is also a member of the ethical review board of the Faculty of Mathematics and Computer Science, and also of the Commission on the Ethics and Security Relevant Research at Saarland University. Welcome. And besides Sarah, we have Leila Methnani, a doctoral student at the Department of Computer Science of Umeå University, where she also received her master's in artificial intelligence. Before, she was also in industry, also, of course, interesting for me that I come from in the industry side, after completing her bachelor's in computer science from the University of British Columbia in Canada. Leila is also author and co-authored several works. Mentioning, I think the more relevant for today is the one of 2021, Let Me Take Over, Variable Autonomy for Meaningful Human Control. Maybe you will talk something about that later. Now we're going to start like we saw in the first panel with short presentations from each one of you. And after that, we will have time for quite challenging questions. You start, Sarah?
Yes, sure. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the introduction. And also thank you very much for putting the slides on. Yes, so my colleagues and I, we have wondered what effective human oversight is supposed to mean. So we wrote this paper so this is the title of a paper, and those are the authors of a paper that we published at the ACM FACT this year. So it's quite fresh still. And if you want to know anything more, you can look into that. All right. So what we wondered is, what is effective human oversight? And famously, the AI Act demands effective human oversight. Article 14 says that you have to have effective human oversight, but Article 14 does not say when human oversight is effective. What it does tell us, though, is the aim of human oversight, which is the prevention or the mitigation of basically fundamental risks. So we took this as our stepping stone in order to formulate a framework that gives us more information on, well, when is human oversight actually effective? What we did not do was we did not do a conceptualization of human oversight itself. we have a rough working definition, something like that maybe, the supervision of a system by at least one natural person, typically with the authority to influence its operations or its effects. But if you like something else better as the definition of human oversight, feel free to substitute that, because our framework does not really hinge on what human oversight is precisely, as long as it's something that is at least roughly akin to this on this slide. What we instead focused on is what is, well, effectiveness in human oversight. And our framework contains 4 parts, basically. The first part is epistemic access. The human oversight person, they should be able to understand the situation they are in. Especially, they should be able to understand the fundamental risks that are at stake, and also the ways that they could interact with the system such that these risks are mitigated. This will typically include understanding the system input, understanding how the system works, understanding the context that the system is used in, and understanding the system output, etc. So these are all the things that have to happen, or that the human oversight person has to know in order to, well, be effective. Secondly, the human oversight person should have self-control. So they should be able to decide for one path of action and actually follow through with it. While this seems very trivial, one of the ways in which self-control could be infringed is when you get to work drunk as a human oversight person, or if you're having a seizure. Also, while this seems very trivial, it's not that trivial, and I will return to that later. Thirdly, the human oversight person should be able to exercise some causal power over the system. So there should be something that the human oversight person can do in order to actually change things, especially in order to actually mitigate fundamental risks, or risks to fundamental rights. So if the human oversight person would just be a silent onlooker that can just observe but not really interfere, we would not say that they're effective. So when these 3 things come together, first the causal power, or you can't see that anyway. So first the causal power, where they actually can do something to interfere with the fundamental risks, the self-control such that they actually can follow through with this action, and the epistemic access such that they can actually know what it is that they're supposed to do. When these 3 things come together, then the human oversight person will be able to mitigate the fundamental risks, well, kind of reliably. It won't be fail-safe, because humans can do mistakes, technology can malfunction, there could be a sudden power outage and then things don't work the way expected, etc. But in general, the human oversight person will be able to mitigate the risk properly. There's a 4th component missing, though, which is the proper intentions. The human oversight person also has to have the intention to mitigate this. They have to want to actually mitigate the risk. If they are a racist asshole that wants to propagate racial bias further, well, even if they would be in a position to mitigate certain racial bias, they probably won't do that. So we 4th need the proper intentions, such that the human oversight person actually can mitigate the risk, and that they also want to mitigate the risk. As a corollary from this, we also get that an effective human oversight person will be morally responsible. While this is probably not super relevant to the like legislative nature of the AI Act, it's nevertheless a nice corollary, because this is one of the big things that we want human oversight to achieve if we look at the whole debate on human oversight even before the AI Act. So we can see that an effective human oversight person should have these 4 conditions, or to shorten it down, they should be morally responsible, plus having the fitting intentions, such that they also want to fulfill their responsibility. The next slide I'm going to skip in the interest of time, because we want to have more time for the discussion afterwards. But so the framework is still quite abstract. We did not really so this is not something that is immediately applicable without further thought. So we tried to make it at least a bit closer to the practicality of human oversight. And there we identified 3 domains in which we can have facilitators or inhibitors of effectiveness. The first one would be certain individual factors of the human oversight person themselves. So they could be trained, they could have a certain domain expertise, they could be very exhausted, they could have certain biases. So all of these things, they would influence the way in which they can oversee, and therefore would influence the effectiveness of their oversight in one way or the other. This is also where it becomes apparent that self-control is actually not a no-brainer, because if somebody is really, really exhausted because their job is so demanding, they will lose self-control at some point in time, even if they don't come to work drunk. So this is something that is important in this framework, and that is not something that that you can ignore. The second factor is the environment, so the way that their job is designed, the way in which they have to make decisions in terms of their roles, so whether there are any role conflicts or not, or if they are under time pressure. These things might influence the effectiveness too. And thirdly, of course, the technical design of a system, like the ways in which the human oversight person can interact and intervene, or the ways in which they can receive information from the system through the interface design of the system. Also, the question of how interpretable or explainable or transparent, whatever term you prefer, the system is. Famously, if I have a black box system where I just see the output and then it gives me a float between 0 and 1, and I don't really know what it means, this is very, very hard to understand whether the output was derived in the reasonable way. So these, again, are 2 factors that can inhibitate or facilitate the human oversight. We did this as an example for a few of these factors, and we found that certain will probably are more likely to inhibit, certain are more likely to facilitate human oversight. And what this shows is that it's not obvious that human oversight can't work effectively at all, but it's also not obvious that it will work effectively. So just from looking at certain instances where human oversight worked or did not work, we can't generalize that very well, because there's just a whole bunch of different factors that can make it work or that can hinder it from working. So I would suggest to not be hasty about judging whether human oversight can be effective or not. This is very much an open research question and an empirical one that is heavily under-researched still. All right, to finish that up, how can our approach help for the whole oversight debate? We identified at least 2 issues. One is that Article 14, so the Article 14.4, this is the part which I skipped before, that tells you certain ways in which you can make something effective. This lacks structure and it's very all over the place. And secondly, Article 14 does not provide a definition of effectiveness. While these 2 things are not necessarily a fault of the AI Act in itself, that does not make it a bad article, or Article 14 a bad article in the law. It definitely is something that negatively affects certain stakeholders here, because they just lack information. They don't really know what they have to do when somebody tells them, or when the AI Act tells them, make your AI system effectively overseen by a human. And this is where our approach tries to help. So it tries to take what's in the AI Act and tries to build on that, something that's a bit more informative than what's in the AI Act currently. All right, so thank you very much for your attention. If you have any questions about any of that, get in touch. Also, thank you very much to my co-authors who are from a very interdisciplinary team. So we have philosophy, computer science, law, and psychology. And I think this is the interdisciplinary mix, plus maybe more subjects that you need to tackle these questions. So I'm really, really happy that we are coming here together today at the IPEN to discuss all of these topics interdisciplinarily. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for that very interesting presentation. And thank you, Isabel, for the introduction. I'll go through it again. My name is Leila Methnani. I'm a PhD student from Umeå University studying researching explainable artificial intelligence. I'm also a member of the Responsible AI group at the same university at the department there. And in explainable AI, what we try to do is illuminate decision-making of opaque AI models. That is to make them more understandable for the humans that are building, using, and being impacted by these models. And we are all increasingly being impacted by these automated decision-making processes daily, in fact. And some examples of automated decision-making we see in our daily lives include Spotify playlists being automatically curated just for you, uniquely yours, as well as, spam filtering in our favorite email client. And these are very obvious examples of automated decision-making. And in some way, they're not so obvious because we might not be thinking about them daily, and they might not be impacting us so much. The effects of these decision-making processes are not so impactful that we would be thinking about them daily. But we do see AI models being integrated more and more into society with increasing stakes and adopted into various industries like finance and like healthcare. So having to skip through a couple of songs just because we didn't like that recommendation on our Spotify list, or having to dig into our spam folder from time to time looking for that email that was lost, it might be frustrating as a user experience, but it pales in comparison to the impact on quality of life that being rejected credit, for example, because of your gender, or being left behind because dark-skinned patients cannot be adequately given a correct diagnosis with these automated decision-making processes that are integrated into healthcare. So these impacts have a much more greater impact on our quality of life. So these two headline articles that I show in the slides are from 2019 and 2018 respectively, but the concerns persist to this day. So they're still relevant to be discussed. And in fact, this this Apple Card incident outlined here that they were investigated after gender discrimination complaints has concluded. And the report, the authorities say that the bank responsible, which is Goldman Sachs, they didn't deploy a sexist algorithm. That was the conclusion, but they still insist that they should have had a plan to deal with the customer confusion and make it easier for them to appeal their credit limits. So the idea here is to protect the right to contest an automated decision-making process, which was the case there. And we have these rights protected under EU law with, for example, GDPR, and now the EU AI Act has also been accepted as law and is intended to protect you, as is outlined in the webpage where I took this screenshot, and it says, dig in, find out more how this legislation can protect you, can do that. But still, there are many questions around Article 14. So just as Sarah mentioned in her presentation, it outlines that high-risk AI systems must be designed in a way to allow humans to effectively oversee them. Well, what is sufficiently effective, and how do we measure that? It also says that oversight measures should match the risks and the context of AI system use. But what about unmeasurable and unforeseen risks? Our world is not static, and we have changing contexts all the time. And thirdly, that I'd like to highlight in the article is AI systems should be provided in a way that allows the overseer to understand its capabilities and limitations. This has been brought up, and the point of interpretability and explainable AI has been brought up, which kind of delights me as an explainable AI researcher, but at the same time, I can see from the inside and be critical of such methods that are applied on top of these automated decision-making systems, because I know that it's not necessarily made for everyone. Interpretability techniques are not so interpretable themselves, not to everyone, at least. So the tools that we have or that we're building today, they still have a long way to go. And this has been highlighted. To think about these oversight mechanisms that we have today, I'd like to highlight human in the loop in particular, which has been brought up as a term here today already. But what does it mean to have a human in the loop? Well, it involves a human overseer who is responsible for steering the automated decision process. So one example that we see technically in practice is reinforcement learning from human feedback, which is presented as a mechanism for oversight for large language models in particular, like ChatGPT or like Llama 2. And if you don't know what reinforcement learning from human feedback is, it's basically a way to include humans in the training process or the fine-tuning of these large language models by asking them to rank their preferences of outputs. They show them like two options and they say, for example, two options, and they say, what do you prefer, option A or option B? And sometimes they give them criteria like, which one of these is more honest, helpful, harmless? And these people, who are, by the way, mostly underpaid crowd workers, are asked to make that decision and steer kind of these models into a direction of human value alignment. Which humans? What values? Universal values? Does that exist? So, you know, there's this kind of illusion of having a human in the loop that is steering our models into safer AI models. And this illusion of oversight is also seen in the behavior or like the exhibition of sycophancy, which is like insincere flattery regardless of the truth. So the AI model might respond, oh, I'm sorry, you are correct. You might have seen this in your interactions with large language models. And it's a way of flattering you into thinking that, okay, it knows that I am right and in control. So there's this illusion to equate that does not necessarily equate to alignment. And I posted a meme here, the Shoggoth with smiley face, to kind of like demonstrate what RLHF is kind of doing and like described to be doing on the internet, which we have this unsupervised learning, the large language model that's not trained, that's not fine-tuned, excuse me. So it's trained on like large amounts of data, and it's this kind of uncontrolled monster. And you have the human mask that is supervised learning. So you have human labeled data that the model is tuned on or like refined on. And then finally, the RLHF step was having the human kind of in there as an oversight, is the smiley face. And it's what's presented to the users and what they get to like, you know, interact with and have a delightful experience with. But in this paper that I referenced below, it's in preprint on arXiv, my co-authors and I discuss this difficulty of like illusion of oversight with just a purely technical RLHF solution. But the solution should be socio-technical. We have perspectives from philosophy and from systems safety engineering that try to bring lessons in from other disciplines. And Sarah mentioned this as well. It's really good to be talking in an interdisciplinary space because these are the kind of solutions that we need to see. Purely technical, it's not going to work. So having a human presence somewhere in around the loop, unsurprisingly, it's not sufficient. And there's this concept from Santoni de Sio and Van den Hoven about meaningful human control. And it has two requirements. It requires that you track relevant reasons behind decisions and you're able to trace back to an individual along the chain who is aware and accepting of the responsibility. So this tracing element is so that, you know, you don't have the overseer as just the person that takes all of the blame, but rather you might be able to trace back through the chain of responsibility to see where other liabilities lie. And in a paper that I wrote together with Andrea Aller-Tubea, Virginia Dignam, and Andreas Theodorou, we talk about variable autonomy for meaningful human control, and we look at this kind of requirement for tracking and tracing and the elements of variable autonomy for kind of effective human control over systems. And what variable autonomy includes is shared control between a system. So you might have fully automated, or you might have something that's fully humanly controlled. And then you have stages in between. And you have, thank you, you have control that can be transferred over at various stages throughout the operation. But one very important element of meaningful of variable autonomy is design decisions of like which aspects of autonomy need to be adjusted. Who are these people that, or who in the whole like chain or even the AI system itself is the one to authorize that transfer of control? How is this transfer of control going to happen? Why and when? All of these design considerations make it very important for an effective transfer of control. And I kind of think about matching the risks and contexts of AI system use or I consider that the world is dynamic, and perhaps variable autonomy or variable oversight over automated systems are maybe a more suitable fit for effective oversight, as opposed to having a static like human in the loop, human over the loop, human completely out of the loop. So the idea is that having variable autonomy requires by design that everything is trackable and traceable to liable individuals on the chain. But efficient transfer of control is an open problem. So again, it has its technical limitations. You need to gain situational awareness. The operator cannot just come into an operation and assume control and ensure everything is safe and handled appropriately. And Sarah had really good examples of that too. Sufficiently informed, they need to know the appropriate time to come in and intervene, and poor delivery of information. So poor explanations and poor transparency will actually worsen the impact of having a human take over. So yes, explainability and interpretability is critical, I would say, but mechanisms, especially with the human present, it's a double-edged sword. Explainable AI currently may lead to worsened effects. So different methods we have for explaining model outputs can introduce confusion, misinterpretation. They can be maliciously used. So you can use an explanation to try to just push your own agenda and hide something else. We are very selective over what we choose to explain. And yeah, they can be misleading and misinterpreted, depending on what the person who's consuming the explanation, what their mental model is over the system, what their previous experience working with these systems is. So essentially, we have a lot of work to do with interpretability, and they should offer support for all the stakeholders, not just for data scientists, financial advisors, and policymakers, as well as healthcare providers who are actually using these high-risk systems that are deployed on site. So a few ways forward that, again, Sarah has already mentioned: interdisciplinarity. It's very important for impactful XAI methods. Working with user experience, user interface designers to help us understand how to actually present explanations in a way that are digestible, palatable, understandable, interpretable. Looking to the social sciences to help us understand how humans explain to one another. Making sure it's human-centric, because who we explain to matters, who the overseer matters. And it's a part of the context. And then we also look towards bringing interactivity and adaptivity for explainable artificial intelligence. And this includes adjustable autonomy and variable autonomy. So we see that kind of for explainability as well as an optimal destination, and perhaps also for human oversight. And with that, I would like to say thank you for your attention. I'm looking forward to questions.
A lot of food for thought and a lot of challenges. I must say, I'm out of the optimism from class and grammar when you were talking about standardization and that it will solve a lot of our problems. I can tell you, that I'm one of the experts working on the standards, and human oversight is a part of it, that you can imagine all what we are confronting every day. And I'm also glad that we have a multidisciplinary group of experts, but it's not enough. So I think your research will be more than welcome into the work we are doing there. And that brings me to the first question about what do we do then? Today we are here to try to find solutions to these challenges. I mean, I see it every day when I get questions in the public sector, especially from startups. Now they're coming, especially in the AI sector. They come to us like, what do we need to do here? What is really human oversight? I mean, and when? Just at the end, in the beginning, during the whole cycle? And what is exactly the meaning of that? And do I have warranties? So who is going to tell me that what I've implemented is correct enough? Especially smaller organizations, that they're creating all this cool stuff now with AI. They want warranties. It requires a lot of investment. They need to sell it to their own investors. I mean, what is really the warranties we get that eventually this will be okay? How are we going to prevent harm? How do we know?
All right, so the question on what we need to do, I think, has a lot of answers, because we need to do many things at once. First of all, we need to find out what we actually want to have. What is the goal that we want to achieve? Partly this is already set by the AI Act, but we need to flesh that out more. Then secondly, we need to work out what actually works. So we need to do a bunch of empirical and disciplinary research, as you mentioned, in order to find out how can we actually achieve the goals that we want to achieve. And thirdly, we should make the stakeholders aware of what their responsibilities are, because this is really not straightforward. And for the AI Act in general, for example, we are, so this is a huge document, the AI Act. Article 14 is just a small part of it. There are a lot legal norms that different stakeholders have to take care of. And this is very overwhelming for certain stakeholders. So we should also make sure with regard to human oversight, but also with regard to all the other responsibilities that people have, to make sure that people know actually what they have to do. And also to make transparent to them if we don't yet know what they have to do, but how they can find out and when they can find out and what they should do in the meantime. We wrote a paper actually that's called, so if you as computer scientists want to know what the AI Act says for programmers, we wrote a paper that's called AI Act for Working Programmers. It's available as an archive preprint, but this is of course only one stakeholder, and we have to do that for the other stakeholders too. So yeah, I would say these three things: working out what we want, working out how we can have it, and making people aware of it.
I think specifically on the multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary point, I think it's very important for everybody to have a common understanding of what we are talking about. If it is oversight, then what does that actually mean, and how does that translate into each of your own disciplines, and how it affects you there when operationalized. So there needs to be these discussions of coming to a common ground on what that actually means, and I think that includes poking holes in it and understanding the problems with it and misinterpreting it, and just like the keynote mentioned this morning earlier this afternoon with how if we can't just slap oversight on it and say, okay, well, there's a human involved, and then therefore the system is we can deploy bad systems because we've put a human in the loop. Well, just like I mentioned in terms of human in the loop, there are different interpretations of what that actually looks like in practice and technically. So there needs to be a common understanding of what it actually means for everyone involved.
Comments bring me a lot of comments back. There's not too much time for that, but I hear you talking about first understanding what we want to do and what the meaning is of that human oversight. But what about when we look at the AI kind of from a holistic approach? I mean, we link that to safety, for instance. So it's not only what we have, but what we want to prevent. So for the ones that know me, you know that I'm really fan of risk management. So obviously, like the first step, identify what do you want to prevent based on context, like we saw in your presentation too. And then, yeah, what kind of type of human oversight mechanisms you can implement one way or the other. But still, I don't hear an answer really from you. I don't have the answer either. I would say it's really use case specific. So I really hope that the work that we are all doing in the research world and the academic world and in the standardization brings some answers, because it's really necessary. And that brings me to a second question. I've heard in all the presentations today the word operator, the word person. But what about a group of people? I mean, what do you think about? This is something we are that concept that we see more often now, where do you let it all in the hands of one person taking care of? And what about if you talk about the interdisciplinary approach to learn about that, but what about human oversight also in the interdisciplinary way, specifically in some specific phases of a life cycle of a system where you know that maybe having one person wouldn't be enough. Like we see with coding, for instance, we do peer reviews. So I mean, we can learn also from security and other fields of expertise where we also use that type of way of doing, like with bias, for instance. You know that we have the social, cognitive, statistical bias. Now we come to the conclusion that probably it's not a matter of only doing some statistical tests, but you should also have some human oversight and influence in what you and the final results that you want to see in a system. We can do a hybrid, for instance, with some adversarial AI system. So how is your take on that? How do you see that? And how do you link that to the concept of liability that has been also mentioned today in the first panel?
All right. Yeah, so I'm not a lawyer, so I can't comment on that very with a lot of certainty. But as I understand the AI Act is kind of clear that that human oversight is happening during use time, but that the system has to be developed and deployed in such a way such that this is possible. So there are responsibilities for deployers and developers, but the human oversight itself is happening at when it is in use. So and also I'm not too sure, but to me, it doesn't seem like the AI Act really envisions a group of people overseeing a system, at least not for one particular use case, but I might be wrong on that. So if there are legal people in here that can comment on that better, I'm happy to do that. So from the point of view of the AI Act, these what if it's a group of people questions are not really relevant, but I think that in a broader perspective they are, because this is always a team effort. Doing a big system requires many hands, and there you have all these problems of many hands, and you need to have ways to tackle that. But I think that software development is kind of good at doing that by having a lot of testing, having a history of changes that have been made to the system when you have certain logging functions in place, etc. So I think that this is already in the realm of computer science and programming working kind of well, but I think especially when it comes to contexts where the human is like once removed from the system because the system can do a lot of things on itself, we have to take care of that there's no dilution of responsibility happening. Yeah, so this, I think, my preliminary answer on that from the AI perspective is not that relevant. From a broader perspective, it might be, but I think it's on kind of good tracks already.
I would echo that point on having these like software development kind of standards and logging and understanding all of these kind of tracking and tracing abilities in software development is a good kind of start or platform for that, springboard for that. But with regards to this, like what group of people, so I used RLHF as an example, and although that is okay, training, I guess, fine tuning and not actually in deployment, although you might have seen it when using ChatGPT at one point, you're given the two options, and that's training data for OpenAI, by the way. But yeah, these groups of people are crowd workers who are salaried, minimum wage, and they're probably trying to just kind of give the answers that their employers, or they think their employers are looking for. So there is this kind of effect, if we're thinking about group of people that might be exploited to be the overseers, and again, that blame can be, that they become vulnerable to be blamed for the failures of these systems, and there's a big problem with that. You need to understand, or like we need to have an understanding of what it means to be an overseer, and that it's not clear in that. So, and with regards to solutions, I mean, I think there are a lot more challenges to discuss than there are solutions, and that could be a good start.
But we need to implement already things. So that is the point. Like, yeah, that's what I was just gonna do. There's the questions from the audience, Sherry? Yeah.
Try to get through here. Excuse me. Okay. So this was a question that I asked on the online. This is a question for Sarah during your presentation that you had. Had a question about the overseer intentions. That was one of the things that was on your slide. So like make a comparison between the AI Act and things that already are in place. So the GDPR has like a DPO role, and it obligates, as for certain parts of its, like Article 38, subsection 6, that you have to avoid conflicts of interests, but it doesn't clarify how. Similar to how you had the issue about effectiveness of overseeing. So the GDPR allows the DPO to be a staff member, and so there's perhaps some open concerns about regulatory capture that could occur in those kinds of scenarios. So how does the AI Act handle that particular form of issue of effectiveness, of avoiding regulatory capture? Would you say it's better, worse, about the same as the GDPR? And if it's perhaps problematic, would you have any ideas about how that might be mitigated? And if there's any unclarity about the regulatory capture term, like specifically about taking over the overseer functions and essentially having them agree with the controller's views on things.
All right, so unfortunately, I can't give you an answer to that because I'm not a legal expert. I'm a philosopher and a computer scientist, so I don't really feel competent on answering this question. What I can say, though, is that the AI Act says very little about intentions, and also it says I think very little on role conflict, so it's even less specific on that than the GDPR. What this implicates, though, I can't tell you because I am not a legal scholar. Yeah, but I don't know if there's like a lawyer in here that wants to comment on this or something. Otherwise, yeah, the time is probably a problem. Yeah.
Well, I think as a general point, and you made it a very good point, that the AI Act is very complicated, but it's on a very high level of abstraction. And you need, when I talked about standards, I will not be misunderstood on this. They're not set in stone. They will be developed in specific industries. So you have one rule industry when it comes to taking over the aircraft, and the person who's doing that must know the aircraft, not only the AI system, So, I mean, we can't, at this level, come up with concrete answers. I think that's a challenge. You have to solve it in different ways, and you have to do it in a pragmatic way. And the point you made was very important as well, that the machine has to do the decision when to hand over the question to the human being. That can't be done by the human. And that's an important programming challenge, I would say. But that must be programmed. Thank you.
From the online audience, yes, yes, there are many questions. One of them is, are there any specific user interface design aspects that you think deserve more attention in the debate around the human oversight of automated decision making?
Can you repeat one more time? Are there user interface considerations?
Yeah, aspects that in the design of the user interface that they should be given more attention.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in the work that I've been doing and trying to look towards social sciences in particular to understand how humans explain or talk or share information with one another, I've found work on conversational design, for example, and how user interfaces are designed with how humans have conversations in mind, and how that facilitates user experience with just like the devices that we build. And I think that's very important for for example, explainability, and of course, the interfaces that the human overseers are interacting with these machines over. So it's an interface that needs to be effective in its communication in terms of making the human aware as quick as possible to assume control and make the right decision as the overseer. So I think, yes, UI definitely a big factor in consideration, especially if we're talking about transfer of control too, saying that a machine can transfer to human and human to machine. That in that moment of transfer of control, there needs to be a clarity, and design is a big factor.
So I 100% agree with that, and I would like to add that you can't really take anything for granted when it comes to user interface design. So I was involved in a few studies that tried to show that if you highlight important things, the human oversight task will become easier, but this apparently works only very inconsistently. And this would have been, I thought, a no-brainer to say, okay, if you highlight important things, it will become easier for the human oversight person to actually see them and act on them. But this apparently is not the case. So I think that every interface should be evaluated really, really well for every single system, for every instance or for every case that needs human oversight. And this needs to be done well because we're dealing with fundamental rights that are at stake. So this is nothing that should be overlooked, and it should get all the attention that it deserves.
Another question. Let's say Articles 14 and 26.2 of the AI regulation provide for obligations for both the provider and the deployer on human oversight. How do you see the division of roles and responsibilities between providers and deployers on human oversight?
Can you repeat the question one more
time?
Yeah,
sorry. So the AI Act assigns responsibilities on human oversight to both AI providers and AI deployers. And how do you see this division of responsibility? How do you think it should be implemented? If in the end of the day, who should do what?
Yeah, I don't have the answer on how to distribute that. I think it depends on a case-by-case basis. You talked about context as well. I think context is everything. And yeah, I'm not sure how you would distribute the responsibility, but I do know that it needs to be clear in terms of who has certain roles and responsibilities and authorities. And as long as you have that logging and that tracking and tracing, there can be more meaningful kind of attribution of accountability and responsibility that way.
So as I understand it, the provider can pass on certain responsibilities to the deployer by, for example, leaving gaps in their system that they require the deployer to fill. So in that sense, it is clear who's responsible for it, because if the provider has not done it, to my understanding, the deployer needs to do it. But still, yeah, that's my shaky understanding as a non-legal person. But I think that I would agree if you, for example, if the deployer is a small company and the provider is, I don't know, Google, we would feel that the most of the responsibility should lie with Google. If the provider is if the provider is a small company and the deployer is Google, we should feel, okay, well, it can't be the small provider that has all the responsibility. So there is definitely some discussion that needs to happen, I think. But I guess this again is a question that's best targeted at somebody who's more versatile in law than we are.
Add to that, since I also have a low background, but anyways, I would say this is even more, in my experience, related to the whole governance that you have to implement. Like from the provider perspective, it's expected that you will provide at minimum instructions, and that you have a clear idea what could be the impact that your application could cause in other organizations that are deploying your own applications. And based on that analysis you have done, you will provide the right instructions, even training, if you are even so nice as to do that. From the deployer side, it also depends on Article, I believe it's 25, you could even become provider if depending on what you are doing. So deployers also need to be really careful with what they are doing when deploying AI systems. But be really clear on who is gonna do that. You have seen it also in your presentation, the different kind of capabilities that somebody one way or the other should have. So who should be responsible? Who should have within your own governance in the organization provide the right training, the right support to that person. Also the way to escalate things when that person that something is not working, and not create a lot of barriers to that. Even law can be a barrier, something like we even see again reminded the child benefits scandal, but even law can be a barrier for some overseers for not acting further on when something that they see it could be wrong. So facilitate what that person or group of persons more something that I better promote what it needs to do their work properly. And monitoring, something, sorry, I have to say, but keep reevaluating, keep monitoring your system, give a door to people to redress, to employees to go back to you, to say, this is not working. Let's go again to the reevaluation process. We tend to forget about that, but it's one of the, it's like, I would say even the only thing we have in AI at this moment, since we don't have answer to everything, keep reevaluating, keep listening, keep going through that.
Yeah, that's the question.
There are more questions. I was just asking for the time.
I'd like to tell you about the time I overrode Skynet. So London 2012, I was a volunteer. I was born in London. I've lived in all parts of London. So I was a driver. And I picked up the Swiss delegation from Heathrow Airport. They wanted to go to a hotel in central London. Now, if you've ever been to Heathrow and you're going to central London, you know it's just a straight road down the M4, which becomes the A4, and you get to central London. So as we're going along, the GPS starts telling me that I need to turn off at a junction. And it was a Sunday afternoon, and I couldn't see any issues with the traffic. So I just ignored the GPS, and it was a female. And then she starts saying, urgent, turn around. And obviously I've got passengers in the back of the car, and I didn't know whether or not they were familiar with London. So I had to turn to them and tell them, just ignore the GPS. I know what I'm doing. Now, the only reason I was able to do that is because, like I say, I've lived in London. I have the local knowledge. BMW had worked with Transport for London to set up priority lanes during the Olympics. And I believe the satellite navigation, they use Galileo. But that just goes to show that people over technology any time of the week, because my knowledge was superior to Skynet's, because I knew that I don't need to turn off. But you see, what happened is volunteers who were new to London, they ended up following Skynet, and they got into a pickle. One volunteer actually abandoned her car because she was so frustrated with the directions that Skynet was giving her. So if you have the local knowledge, you can outdo a machine. And so this human oversight, yeah, local knowledge, people over technology any day of the week.
So I understand that was more a comment, or is there a okay, thank you. Please. Oh, a question over there. Okay. Eyes on the floor. Please.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentations. My name is Upteen Colonel. I'm a DPO. And I was just thinking to the questions that was initially with regard to the DPO role and the AI oversight mechanism, the human oversight. And then you talked about human in the loop, which I think is a bit different from human oversight. You know, you talk about human in the loop, human on the loop, as you gave out different examples. And I'm wondering why it was a human oversight aspect. And I would just want to connect it also to your question, Isabel. You know, we talked about society in the loop. is something that you also talk about. You know, do you get the entire society? How do you get that into the whole system of getting feedback? And there's this possibility to give feedback as well in the AI Act as well. And would you consider that to be as part of the human oversight as well? And what do you mean with the oversight? Because in the GDPR, the DPO has supervisory role, you know, advisory role kind of thing, but they're not using the same terms in the AI Act. So is it supposed to be the same thing? Can stakeholders, users, deployers, anyone who give feedback for that be considered to be human oversight or not? And would that include many groups, many disciplinaries, and so on? Thank you.
Thank you. Wants to address that?
Yeah, so that's the point, right? As well, we all have kind of different understandings of what that oversight might mean, or what human in the loop might mean on, around, or out. But the thing is, you said that it's not an example of human oversight, but I've seen it in technical works being described as human oversight, specifically that. Right? No, exactly. But it reinforces the point, right? Like maybe in technical circles, this is what the message is, that this kind of technical solution is a mechanism for oversight, and then it is sold as kind of a road to alignment and safe AI, when in fact it's not. So it's important for, again, different disciplines to be discussing this terminology and coming to a common ground on like, what does it actually mean and what does it entail, and then we can try to kind of like untangle these uncertainties. So I think it's a very valid question, and yeah, no, I guess I don't have an answer except for there are different perspectives on what that means, and we need to kind of iron out those kinks.
So to your last part of your question, whether if we have some feedback mechanism from users or so, if that should be considered as part of human oversight. So definitely alone, they are not human oversight because they can't change anything about the system. So they would not definitely not be human overseers or human oversight people in the sense of the AI Act, because this would just not fit the norm at all. But I think also in the broader sense, they should not really be considered human overseers because it puts way too much responsibility on them, in a way that, and they don't really have the causal power to change something about the system. If the designers of the system want to, they can take their input into account and change the system accordingly. They can even set up mechanisms such that, I don't know, it happens automatically to some extent, but they're not human overseers because they don't have the insight into the system and they don't have the means to change it. You need a dedicated person or group of people to do that, and that can't be the users. And also I think society in the loop is, in a sense, a bit of an illusion in that way, because you can never have society in the loop like you can have a single human or a small group of people in the loop, because society will never have the same power over the system as like the people who actually maintain the system have. So yeah, so this would be my addition to your answer.
Yeah, well, I just said that I see more human oversights in the, I will look at it from the AI Act perspective as really linked to safety and eventually with the purpose of preventing harm. So that's why the oversight term. But regarding to your proposal of a society and overseeing, I would say this. I see this more like a kind of a support of a mechanism of human oversight. That will be used for reevaluation of systems for the whole process. And it's not so different like what we do in cybersecurity with a responsible disclosure mechanism, for instance, where people from the outside can try to stress your system and you give certain criteria in a way. And I think what we see nowadays with AI systems is in fact really useful to get that feedback because the scope of your tests are limited. So if we open at least certain questions to society, we might benefit from it, but not as a concept of really proper human oversight, more as a extra support for the whole mechanism.